What happens when the man you betray doesn't yell, doesn't beg, but simply starts building a legal case? How does a single lie turn into a full collapse when your husband sees the truth with his own eyes? The day I thought I had covered my tracks was the day he began quietly erasing me from his life. My name is Elara Quinn, 34, and I always thought I was smarter than consequences. I used to tell people that I believed in emotional honesty, that not every connection had to fit into neat moral boxes. That was how I justified meeting my ex again, Adrian, the one who broke my heart before I met Ryan. I told myself it was harmless, that I only wanted closure, a proper goodbye to the person I'd once loved. When Ryan asked why I'd been distracted lately, I said work was stressful. When he offered to take me out to clear my head, I told him I needed time alone. The truth was, I liked the thrill of being wanted again. Adrian knew exactly what to say, the same way he used to when we were young. He told me I hadn't changed at all, that I still had the same laugh, the same spark. I believed him, even though I should have known better. Ryan wasn't unkind, just steady, predictable, too safe. Our life was routine. School drop-offs, dinners at home, weekend errands. Adrian made me feel like the version of myself I'd left behind. When I first met Ryan, that safety felt like peace. Now it felt like a cage. I started telling myself that what I was doing wasn't wrong, that every woman deserved a private world no one could judge. I even convinced myself that lies could be acts of mercy, that I was sparing Ryan from pain he didn't need to feel. The night he walked in on me and Adrian together, I still believed I could talk my way out of anything. He didn't shout. He didn't demand an explanation. He just looked at me, silent and pale, like something in him had finally gone still. That silence terrified me more than any anger could have, because I didn't realize in that moment that silence was the sound of my life coming apart piece by piece. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It started with a message I shouldn't have answered. Adrian's name appeared on my phone one afternoon at work, after almost 10 years of no contact. He wrote that he'd heard I'd gotten married and wanted to say congratulations. It sounded innocent enough. I stared at the message for hours before replying, telling myself it was rude not to answer. I said thanks and asked how he was doing. That was the first lie, pretending I cared only as an old friend. Adrian replied right away. He said life had been strange since his divorce, that he missed having someone who really knew him. I told him I understood, that marriage wasn't always what people thought it would be. He said maybe we could catch up sometime, no pressure, just coffee. I hesitated for about 5 seconds before saying yes. I didn't tell Ryan, of course. He was the kind of man who believed certain lines shouldn't be crossed, and I wasn't ready to hear him say no. We met at a quiet coffee shop near the lake on a Thursday evening. Adrian looked almost the same, older, sharper around the eyes, but still familiar. He smiled when he saw me, said I looked exactly like he remembered. I laughed, said he was lying, but I liked the way it sounded. We talked for hours about old memories, about the things that had gone wrong back then, about what-ifs. When he asked if I was happy in my marriage, I said yes, mostly. I said Ryan was good to me, stable. Adrian said I deserved more than stable. I told him not to start trouble. He said he wasn't. He was just reminding me of who I used to be. That night, when I got home, Ryan was sitting on the couch watching the news. He asked why I was late. I said the traffic was bad and that I'd stopped at the store. He nodded, said dinner was in the oven. His calmness made me nervous, like he could already tell I was lying. I overcompensated, kissed him on the cheek, said I'd missed him. He smiled faintly, but didn't say it back. The next few weeks became a pattern. Adrian texted, I answered. Ryan asked small questions, I deflected. I told myself nothing physical was happening, so it didn't count. It was just two people talking. But I started dressing differently, more carefully, more deliberately. I told Ryan it was because of work meetings. He said I didn't have to impress anyone. I said he wouldn't understand. He said, "You're right," and went back to his book. That should have been a warning, but I mistook it for indifference. When Naomi, my younger sister, came over one weekend, I told her about Adrian. She laughed, said everyone talks to an ex now and then. She told me not to feel guilty, that Ryan was too quiet, too old-fashioned, that I needed something exciting to remind me I was still young. I clung to her approval like proof that I wasn't doing anything wrong. Adrian started calling me in the evenings. We'd talk for hours about his divorce, my job, the things we missed about each other. He said he wished he'd fought harder for me back then. I said it was too late, but I didn't mean it. I started looking forward to those calls more than I looked forward to anything else. One night, Ryan asked if I'd been talking to someone. I said, "Of course not." He said my mood had changed, that I seemed distracted. I told him he was imagining things, that he was being paranoid. He apologized, said he didn't mean to make me feel accused. I played the victim, told him it hurt that he didn't trust me. I even cried a little, and he comforted me. That was the moment I realized how easy it was to twist him around with guilt. A few days later, Adrian suggested we meet again. I hesitated, then said yes. We met at a small restaurant on the edge of town. It felt like stepping into another life, one where I wasn't a wife or a mother, just a woman who could still turn heads. He asked if Ryan suspected anything. I said no, that Ryan trusted me too much. Adrian smiled and said that kind of trust could be dangerous. When I got home that night, Ryan was sitting in the dark. I asked why he hadn't turned on the lights. He said he'd just been thinking. I asked what about. He said, whether people stay the same or just get better at hiding who they are. I laughed awkwardly and told him he was reading too many crime novels. He didn't respond. The next morning, I found him quietly folding laundry before work. He looked up and asked if I was happy. I said yes, of course. He said, "Good. I like when you smile, even when it isn't for me." Then he walked out the door. That sentence stayed in my head all day. It sounded simple, but something about it chilled me. I told myself I was overreacting, that Ryan was just being sentimental. Still, when I met Adrian again that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had already started watching everything crumble, someone who didn't need to shout to make me afraid. After that, the messages turned into daily habits. Good morning texts, midday calls, late-night jokes. Adrian made me feel young again, reckless in a way I hadn't felt since my 20s. I told myself it was harmless, that I wasn't doing anything physical, that emotions didn't count. Every time Ryan looked at me with that quiet calm of his, I convinced myself he didn't notice, or that if he did, he didn't care enough to stop me. At work, I started checking my phone constantly. My coworkers noticed, but I brushed it off as client stuff. The truth was, Adrian made ordinary days feel electric. He'd send small compliments about my laugh, my hair, my voice. I told myself it was innocent, that I could handle it. One afternoon, he said he'd been thinking about me, and instead of feeling alarmed, I smiled. It felt like permission to escape from the dull rhythm of home. Ryan was patient to a fault. He didn't accuse me of anything, just observed quietly. One night, he said he missed how we used to talk. I said we still talked all the time. He said, "Not like before." I told him he was imagining problems because he was bored. He nodded, didn't argue, just said, "Maybe." That maybe should have shaken me, but it didn't. I mistook his quiet for weakness. When Naomi came over that weekend, I vented about Ryan. I said he'd become impossible to talk to, that he was suspicious for no reason. She said he sounded insecure, and maybe he needed a reminder that I had options. I laughed, pretending it was a joke, but the idea stayed in my head. Later that night, when Adrian asked if I ever felt trapped, I told him maybe sometimes. He said I deserved to feel alive. That word, alive, felt intoxicating. A week later, I told Ryan I had to travel for a work seminar in another town. He asked when I'd decided that. I said it had been planned for weeks. He asked why I hadn't mentioned it before. I said he didn't need to know everything. He just said, "You're right," and walked out of the room. I thought I'd won. Adrian booked a hotel, said it would be easier than pretending to attend a conference. I hesitated, but the excitement drowned out my caution. When I packed my overnight bag, I told Ryan not to wait up. He said, "I wouldn't dream of it." I ignored the bitterness in his tone. At the hotel, Adrian greeted me with a bottle of wine and that familiar grin. We talked for hours, mostly about the past, the what-ifs, the things we thought we'd outgrown. I kept checking my phone, expecting Ryan to call, to demand answers, to show he still cared. But my phone stayed silent all night. For the first time, his silence felt heavy, not gentle. I told Adrian it made me uneasy. He said it was just guilt talking. I pretended to agree, but a part of me couldn't stop thinking about Ryan sitting alone at home with Ivy. When I came back the next afternoon, Ryan was in the backyard fixing a loose fence board. I said hello. He didn't look up. I told him the seminar went well. He said, "Good to know." That was all. His calm made me defensive. I accused him of being cold. He said, "I'm just adjusting." I asked what he meant. He said, "To honesty." Then he picked up his tools and walked away. Over the next few days, his behavior confused me. He stopped checking my phone, stopped asking where I was, stopped caring. At least that's how it looked. When I stayed out late, he didn't text. When I came home smelling of wine, he didn't ask. It was like he'd quietly resigned from our marriage. I started trying to provoke him, to get any reaction. I told him maybe we needed a break, some space. He said, "We're already taking one, you just haven't noticed." Naomi thought he was bluffing. She said men like him always talk about leaving, but never actually do. I believed her because it was easier than facing what his silence really meant. At work, gossip started. Someone mentioned seeing me out with Adrian at lunch. I denied it immediately, saying it was a client meeting. But the way they looked at me told me the rumor had already grown legs. That night, I told Adrian we needed to be more careful. He said not to worry. People always talk. I wanted to believe him, but something in me knew the walls were closing in. Then, one evening, I came home early from work. Ryan was in the kitchen with Ivy, helping her with a school project. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't warmth. It was finality. He said, "I saved you dinner." I thanked him, trying to sound normal. He said, "You don't have to pretend anymore." I froze. I asked what he meant. He said, "You've already chosen the life you want. I'm just letting you live it." He didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse me. He just spoke as if it were a fact, not a fight. Then he handed me an envelope and said, "You'll understand soon." I opened it after he went upstairs. Inside was a bank statement showing half our savings transferred to a new account, his account. For the first time, I realized he wasn't bluffing. He wasn't waiting for me to stop. He was already preparing to leave, and doing it so quietly I hadn't even noticed until it was too late. A few days later, the illusion shattered completely. Adrian started growing careless, texting me at odd hours, calling when I was home. One evening, he asked if he could stop by because he was in the neighborhood. I told him it wasn't a good idea, but he laughed, said he'd just drop something off and leave. I convinced myself it would be fine. Ryan was supposed to work late. Ivy was at my mother's. 10 minutes later, Adrian was on my couch, feet up, glass of wine in his hand, talking about how good it felt to finally be honest. I told him we weren't being honest. We were being stupid. He said, "Stupid can feel good sometimes." I was about to tell him to leave when the front door opened. Ryan wasn't supposed to be home yet. He stepped inside, quiet, steady, keys still in his hand. The look on his face when he saw us wasn't anger. It was recognition, like a truth he'd already accepted long before that moment. I jumped up, started talking too fast. I said Adrian had dropped by to discuss something about his divorce, that it wasn't what it looked like. Ryan didn't answer. He just looked at Adrian, then at me, then walked upstairs without saying a word. Adrian panicked, said he should go. I told him to stay, that leaving would make it look worse, but he left anyway. I stood alone in the living room, heart racing, waiting for Ryan to come back down and explode. But he never did. Later that night, I found him asleep, or pretending to be, in the guest room. I tried to start a conversation, but he kept his eyes closed. The silence was unbearable. The next morning, he acted normal. He made breakfast for Ivy, kissed her goodbye, and left for work like nothing had happened. I spent the whole day waiting for a confrontation that never came. When Naomi called, I told her everything. She said to stay calm, to stick to my story. He didn't see anything, she said. He's guessing. Don't confess to what he can't prove. That advice sounded reasonable then. Over the next few days, Ryan's silence grew louder. He stopped saying goodnight, stopped sitting beside me at meals. He wasn't cruel. He was polite, distant, deliberate. It scared me more than shouting ever could. I tried to repair things by acting sweet, cooking his favorite meals, pretending nothing had happened. He thanked me every time but never met my eyes. One night, he said quietly, "You don't have to pretend anymore." I said I didn't know what he meant. He said, "That's what scares me most." A week later, I noticed strange things missing. His birth certificate, some financial files, the spare set of car keys. When I asked if he'd misplaced them, he said, "No, I've been organizing." That word again, organizing. I should have realized what it meant, but I told myself it was paranoia. I went to see Adrian again, desperate for distraction. He seemed nervous, distant. He said maybe it was a mistake to keep meeting. I told him not to act guilty, that we hadn't done anything wrong. He said, "Maybe you can believe that. I can't." I felt anger rise in my throat. I reminded him that he'd started this. He said, "And now I'm ending it." Then he walked away, leaving me standing outside his apartment like I was the problem to erase. When I got home that night, Ryan was waiting in the kitchen. He asked where I'd been. I said I'd gone for a drive. He nodded, said, "You must like driving in circles." I laughed awkwardly, asked what that was supposed to mean. He said, "It means you keep ending up in the same place, alone with your choices." The next morning, Ivy asked why Daddy wasn't sleeping in their room anymore. I said he was tired from work. She said, "You're lying. Daddy said you're figuring things out." I froze. I asked what else he said. She shrugged and ran off to school. My chest ached with a kind of panic I'd never felt before. That weekend, I tried to make things right. I told Ryan we should take a family day, go to the park, just the three of us. He agreed. We went, smiled for Ivy's sake, even took a few photos. But that night, when I posted one online, I noticed something. Within an hour, the photo was gone. Deleted. Ryan had removed his account entirely. That was when I checked our shared finances again. The savings were empty. My credit card limits were reduced. Even my car insurance showed his name removed. He hadn't just withdrawn, he was dismantling our life quietly, piece by piece. I confronted him that night, finally shouting. I said he couldn't just erase me, that he was being manipulative. He said, "You did that first. I'm just documenting it." I told him I'd never forgive him if he tried to turn Ivy against me. He said, "You've already done that yourself." Then he handed me an envelope, his lawyer's card clipped to the front. I remember laughing because I didn't know what else to do. I said he was bluffing, that he'd never go that far. He said, "You're right. I don't bluff. I build." Then he walked out of the room, leaving me standing there with proof that the calm I'd mistaken for surrender had been strategy all along. The following week felt like living inside a slow collapse. Every morning, Ryan acted normal, packing Ivy's lunch, leaving for work, calling his mother in the evenings. But under that routine, something cold and exact was moving. I felt it. Every time he passed me in the hallway without a glance, every time he answered me in that polite, detached tone, I knew he wasn't ignoring me. He was recording everything in his head. Naomi told me to take control of the story before he did. She said I should make people see how unstable he'd become, that if I looked like the reasonable one, no one would believe whatever he was planning. It sounded clever in theory. So when my parents came for dinner that weekend, I put on a bright smile and said Ryan had been distant, that maybe he was depressed, maybe even paranoid about nothing. He sat there quietly, letting me talk. When my father asked if that was true, Ryan said, "People tell different versions of the same story. I prefer mine written down." The silence that followed was suffocating. After dinner, I pulled him aside and asked what that was supposed to mean. He said, "It means I'm done trying to prove what you already know." I told him he was twisting things, that he was making himself the victim. He said, "No, I'm making sure there's a record this time." That word again, record. It made me feel like my own husband had turned into a stranger. At work, things weren't better. I caught 2 co-workers whispering as I walked by. One of them, a woman who used to join me for lunch, avoided eye contact completely. I found out later that someone, probably Ryan, had sent a polite but firm email to my manager asking for confirmation of business travel dates. It wasn't rude or accusatory, it was factual, professional. That made it worse. The company confirmed there was never any seminar the weekend I'd said I was away. Suddenly, I wasn't the confident woman in control. I was the office joke who couldn't even keep her lies straight. When I confronted Naomi, she said I was overreacting. But I saw the doubt in her eyes too. She asked if maybe Ryan had really seen something that night. I told her he'd walked in at the wrong time, nothing more. She said, maybe that's still enough. That was the first time she didn't defend me. Ryan grew bolder in his quiet revenge. One evening, he told me we'd have guests for dinner, his mother, his friend Darren, and Darren's wife. I spent all afternoon cooking, trying to act normal. When they arrived, the atmosphere was painfully polite. Halfway through the meal, Clara asked if everything was all right between us. Ryan smiled, said, "Everything's fine. Elara's just been rediscovering old friendships." My fork froze mid-air. Darren's wife looked at me with polite curiosity. I laughed it off, said he was joking, but I could see the doubt on their faces. After they left, I exploded. I accused him of humiliating me on purpose. He said, "You did that yourself. I just gave people context." I said I'd never forgive him for turning my family against me. He said, "You were counting on silence. I'm counting on proof." Then he walked upstairs, like the conversation was finished. The next morning, I found a stack of documents on the counter. Bank statements, screenshots, photos. Every detail of the last 3 months, all dated and organized. There was even a printed copy of the hotel's reservation confirmation under Adrian's name, linked to my card. I realized he'd been collecting everything while pretending not to care. I called Naomi, hysterical. She said to stay calm, that he couldn't actually use any of it without a lawyer. I said, "He already has one." That night, I tried to reach Adrian. He didn't answer. His number went straight to voicemail. When I checked his social media, his profile was gone. He'd vanished completely, like he'd never existed. I sat on the couch for hours, staring at nothing. For the first time, I started to understand how thoroughly I'd cornered myself. Then, just after midnight, there was a knock at the door. A courier handed me an envelope and asked for my signature. Inside was a formal letter. Notice of intent to file for divorce and custody petition. Quinn versus Quinn. My name beside his, cold and official. I dropped it on the floor. When Ryan came downstairs the next morning, I tried to act unaffected. I said he couldn't possibly go through with it, that it would destroy Ivy's world. He said, "You already did that. I'm just building her a safer one." I called him heartless, told him he was ruining everything for a single mistake. He said, "A mistake ends when you stop repeating it." Then he picked up his lunchbox and left for work. By that afternoon, everyone knew. My parents called. Naomi stopped answering, and even Ivy's teacher asked if everything was all right at home. The rumor spread faster than I could react. The story wasn't mine anymore. It was his, neat and documented, wrapped in legal language. That night, I stood in the kitchen staring at the envelope again. I had lied to cover myself, lied to protect what I thought was mine. But Ryan wasn't yelling, wasn't begging, wasn't breaking things. He was simply dismantling me with paperwork and precision. And somehow, that was worse than any fury I'd ever feared. The first court date arrived faster than I could process. I woke up early that morning, numb and shaky, unable to decide what to wear. Naomi told me to look confident, like someone who still had control. I chose a navy dress and low heels, simple makeup. I told myself that if I stayed calm, the judge would see through Ryan's overreaction. That word, overreaction, was how I tried to make sense of everything. I still believed this was all fixable, that he just needed to hear me explain. Ryan was already at the courthouse when I arrived, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom. He was dressed in a gray suit, nothing fancy, but his composure made him look untouchable. He nodded when he saw me, polite as ever. I wanted to shake him, to demand some emotion, but he just opened a folder and went back to reading. That cold civility felt worse than anger. Inside, the hearing began quietly. The lawyers spoke in calm tones, reading facts like they were reading weather reports. Ryan's lawyer went first, describing his client as a devoted father who had sought only to protect the emotional and financial stability of his child after a confirmed pattern of dishonesty within the marriage. Those words, confirmed pattern, made my stomach twist. Then came the evidence. My hotel booking, screenshots of messages between Adrian and me, timestamps of phone calls, even a copy of the restaurant bill from the night Ryan had walked in. Everything was printed neatly in a binder. I stared at the pages in disbelief, trying to figure out when he had gathered it all. My lawyer objected a few times, but the judge overruled. Ryan had documented everything legally, thoroughly, and quietly. When it was my turn to speak, I tried to sound composed. I said that my marriage had been strained, that I'd made mistakes, but that Ryan was using them to punish me. I told the judge I was a good mother, that Ivy needed both of us. My voice shook halfway through. Ryan didn't look at me once. Then his lawyer handed over a letter Ryan had written to the court. It wasn't bitter or dramatic. It was simple. It said he still respected me as Ivy's mother, but he could no longer maintain a household founded on deceit. It also said he wanted full custody for now, not to hurt me, but to provide structure and peace. The judge read it silently, then nodded. I wanted to scream. During a recess, I caught up to Ryan in the hallway. I asked if this was really what he wanted, if he'd thought about what it would do to Ivy. He said, "That's why I'm doing it." I told him I'd never forgive him. He said, "You already stopped forgiving yourself. I'm just following your lead." Then he turned away to speak with his lawyer. When court resumed, the judge ruled temporarily in his favor: primary custody, financial oversight, and access to the house for 90 days until the final review. I felt my knees weaken. My lawyer whispered that we could appeal, that it wasn't over, but I barely heard him. Ryan didn't gloat. He didn't even glance my way as he signed the documents. Afterward, Clara hugged him outside the courthouse. I stood there, frozen, feeling like a ghost at my own funeral. Naomi tried to say something comforting, but her voice was small and unsure. "Maybe he just needs time," she whispered. I didn't answer. I already knew time was the one thing he wouldn't give me again. That night, I went home to an empty house. Ryan had taken Ivy to Clara's for a few days. Her toys were still scattered around the living room, small reminders of what I'd lost. On the kitchen table sat another envelope, this one from his lawyer, detailing the court's temporary orders. I stared at my own name printed below his. Defendant. It felt like a brand. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. I left a message saying he'd won, that he'd gotten what he wanted. A few hours later, he texted back a single sentence. This was never about winning. The next morning, I drove to Clara's house, desperate to see Ivy. Clara met me at the door, said the visitation had to be supervised for now. She didn't look cruel, she looked tired. I told her this wasn't fair. She said, "Fairness doesn't live here anymore, Elara. You chased it away." I turned and walked to the car, my throat burning. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch surrounded by silence. I scrolled through old photos of our family. Ryan smiling, Ivy on his shoulders, me holding their hands. It looked like a life someone else had lived. I realized he hadn't taken revenge. He'd taken precision. He'd cut through every lie I built with clean, legal edges, leaving nothing to argue with. When the mail came the next day, there was one more letter, notice of property separation and sale. It listed every item we owned, down to the furniture. I laughed, a sharp, broken sound that echoed in the empty room. For years, I thought I was the one in control, the one who understood how to manipulate a story. But he was the one writing the ending all along. The house is almost empty now. Boxes line the hallway, the walls stripped of photos, the air still. It's strange how quickly a home can stop feeling like one. Ryan came yesterday to collect the last of his tools. He was polite, as always, but he didn't step further than the doorway. He said he'd be sending movers for the remaining furniture. I asked if we could talk, just 5 minutes. He said, "There's nothing left to talk about, Elara." I wanted to argue, but the way he said my name, flat, final, made my throat close. After he left, I sat on the floor where our couch used to be. The imprint of the carpet was still there, like a faint ghost. I kept replaying the moment he'd walked in that night and the silence that followed. I used to think the worst thing a man could do was yell. Now I know the worst thing is when he doesn't have to anymore. Silence is heavier than shouting. Naomi doesn't call much these days. When she does, her voice sounds cautious, like she's afraid of saying the wrong thing. She asked last week if I'd seen Ivy. I said yes, during the supervised visit at Clara's. It was only an hour, and Clara sat in the corner the whole time pretending to read. Ivy was quiet at first, then asked if I was feeling better now. I said yes, but I didn't even know what that meant. When it was time to leave, she hugged me tightly, then ran to Ryan's car without looking back. I came home after that visit and walked through every room. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner, but it reminded me of how Ryan used to clean when he was angry. Never yelling, just scrubbing, fixing, organizing. I used to mock him for it, called him obsessive. Now I understand it was the only way he knew how to survive me. The final court papers arrived 2 days ago. Divorce finalized. Custody granted to Ryan. My name appeared in neat black letters beside words like non-custodial and limited visitation. The language was emotionless, almost gentle in its cruelty. I held the papers for a long time, waiting to feel something: rage, grief, shame. What came instead was emptiness, like I'd been hollowed out. Adrian never resurfaced. Someone at work said he'd moved across the state. I deleted his number, though part of me still checks my messages at night. Not because I miss him, but because I want someone to acknowledge that I existed in their story. Ryan erased me without hate, without noise. That's what makes it unbearable. He didn't destroy me out of anger. He just quietly removed the parts of his life where I used to fit. Yesterday, Clara called to confirm that the house sale had gone through. She said Ryan wanted to handle everything through the lawyers so we wouldn't have to see each other again. I thanked her, even though my voice cracked. Before hanging up, she said, "He doesn't hate you, Elara. He's just done." I think that hurt more than hate would have. Tonight, I'm sitting in the empty living room with the lights off. The echo of my own breathing fills the space. There's nothing left to pack, nothing left to explain. I keep thinking about the moment when Ryan saw me with Adrian and didn't say a word. That was the true ending. Not the court papers, not the custody ruling. The moment he stopped trying to understand me was the moment everything died. Outside, I can hear the faint sound of a car engine fading down the street. For a second, I imagine it's him, coming back for something he forgot. But the sound disappears, leaving only quiet. I whisper, "It wasn't what it looked like," out of habit. My voice catches in the empty air. There's no answer now. There never will be. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.